She was kicked out by her own son, but what he found. Years later shocked everyone. Welcome to our storytelling channel, where every tale is a journey of emotion, truth, and unexpected turns. If this story touched your heart, let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. We love hearing your stories too. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow, we'll bring you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Thank you for being here with us. Your support keeps these stories alive. Linda Mitchell had spent her entire life putting others first. At 71 years old, she had endured decades of hardship with quiet resilience. She raised her son Brian on her own after losing her husband in a factory accident. She worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper, skipped meals so Brian could have school books, and never once complained. Every dollar was stretched, every sacrifice made in silence. The house Brian now lived in, it used to be hers. A modest 2-bedroom cottage tucked near the edge of town, paid off with over 30 years of hard work and discipline. When Brian got married, Linda signed the deed over to him as a gesture of love, a promise that she would always have a place in his home and in his life. But that promise broke the moment Brian found out Linda had lost her job. She hadn't told him right away. She didn't want to worry him. Her back had been failing, and the doctor warned her that continuing to lift cleaning carts and heavy supplies could cause permanent damage. So she quietly stepped away from work, believing that her family would understand. They didn't. Brian stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes hard. His wife, Kelly, hovered behind him, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. Linda held her breath as she clutched the worn handle of her suitcase. "You should have told us," Brian said, his voice sharp. "You've been sitting around here all day, eating our food, not doing anything." Linda's lips trembled. "I wasn't feeling well. I didn't want to be a burden." "Not well or not working," Kelly cut in. "Either way, we're barely getting by. We can't afford to support you too." Brian didn't argue. He didn't remind his wife of the woman who once worked 3 jobs to pay for his braces, or the night she stayed awake sewing uniforms for his school band. He didn't thank her for the house or for the years she'd poured into making him who he was. He just said, "It's time you figured things out on your own. We've got kids to raise." No hug, no goodbye. Just the sound of her suitcase wheels scraping against the cracked driveway as Linda walked away. She didn't cry. Not when the door closed behind her. Not when she reached the bus stop 3 blocks over. The weight of 71 years pressed into her spine, but she kept walking. What Brian didn't know was that his mother hadn't left empty-handed. She hadn't just lost a job. She had let go of a role. And now, with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of silence, Linda was about to begin again. Not with revenge, but with a quiet strength no one had ever truly seen. And that, as it turns out, would change everything. What Brian didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Linda Mitchell hadn't been fired. She had resigned, quietly, on her own terms. After decades of pushing her body to its limit, her doctor finally told her the truth. Her spine couldn't take the strain anymore. One wrong lift, one heavy cart too many, and she'd be in a wheelchair. So she stepped away from the only job she'd known. The church where she worked part-time begged her to stay. But Linda, with grace and dignity, walked away. She told no one, because Linda had long ago learned the power of silence, of holding things close. And deep inside that silence, she carried a secret, one that no one in her family, not even Brian, had ever discovered. 34 years ago, when her husband David died in that factory accident, the payout from the insurance company wasn't much, but tucked within the paperwork, overlooked by almost everyone, was something far more valuable. A deed. A small plot of land in rural Kentucky, left to David by a great-uncle no one had spoken to in decades. Back then it had no road access, no water, and everyone told her to sell it. Take the few thousand and move on. But Linda didn't. She held on to it, year after year. even when she barely had enough money for groceries, even when Brian needed new shoes and she had to work an extra shift to afford them. Every spring, she scraped together just enough to pay the property taxes. Something told her to keep it. Just in case, she would whisper to herself. Then last fall, the phone rang. A young man in a sharp suit introduced himself as a land acquisition manager. There was a new solar development moving through the region, and his company wanted to buy surrounding land, including hers. Linda nearly dropped the phone when she heard the number. $1.4 million. Not just life-changing, generation-changing. But Linda didn't run out and spend it. She didn't even tell Brian. Instead, she made one quiet phone call to the church foundation that once helped her during her hardest years. With their help, she set up a trust in her late husband's, one that only she could access. No one else would know, because Linda had never been interested in showing off. She wasn't out to prove anything. She wanted safety, purpose, and more than anything, she wanted to build something that could never be taken away from her again. That morning, as she wheeled her suitcase down the street with cracked soles and a pounding heart, inside her purse wasn't a farewell letter or a bottle of medicine. It was a checkbook and a bank card, both linked to a hidden fortune no one could see. To the world, she was just another old woman with nowhere to go. But in truth, Linda Mitchell was carrying the blueprint of a brand new life. And this time, it would be hers, on her terms. That night, Linda didn't check into a fancy hotel or rent an apartment. She had the money, but she wasn't ready for comfort. Not yet. Instead, she walked into the downtown women's shelter just before midnight, suitcase in hand, eyes tired but steady. The volunteers didn't recognize her, and she didn't offer any explanation. She simply asked, "Do you have a bed for tonight?" They gave her one. A small cot in the corner of a room filled with quiet breathing and stories no one ever asked to hear. And in that space, surrounded by women who had been pushed to the edges of life, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Understood. She didn't mention her bank account. She didn't flaunt her plans. She simply listened, shared her food, offered her coat to someone colder than she was. She had walked away from her past, but now she was walking into something new, something that mattered. By sunrise, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Later that week, Linda visited a crumbling little house on the edge of town. The roof sagged, the porch steps groaned, and weeds had swallowed what once might have been a flower bed. It was the kind of place most people would pass by without a second glance. But Linda saw potential. She paid cash. No mortgage, no questions. The property was signed under the name Grace Holdings LLC, a name she chose because Grace was the one thing life had always tried to take from her, and she refused to let it. Over the next 3 weeks, workers came and went. New plumbing, fresh, leaky roof fixed. The neighbors watched with curiosity, but no one ever saw the owner. Linda kept it that way. When the work was finished, she moved in alone quietly, just like she had done everything else. There was no grand opening, no press, just a small wooden sign she hung by the front door with her own 2 hands. Linda's table. That's what she would call it. It wouldn't just be a soup kitchen. It wouldn't just be a shelter. It would be a place where no one was thrown away for being tired, broke, or forgotten. A place for single moms, struggling families, runaway teens, and yes, even sons who had lost their way. She didn't need revenge. She didn't want headlines. She just wanted a safe space where no one had to prove their worth before they were handed a warm meal or a second chance. She filled the pantry, ordered beds, planted sunflowers by the mailbox, hired 3 women from the shelter to help her run the place. And when the doors finally opened, Linda stood behind the front desk in a soft beige sweater, her eyes calm, her heart full. No one knew who she was, but every person who walked through those doors would feel it. Linda Mitchell hadn't just built a shelter. She had built a sanctuary, and the world, without even realizing it, was about to be changed by a woman it had once cast aside. 2 years passed. While Linda quietly nurtured her new life, feeding the hungry, offering warmth to the forgotten. Her son's world slowly crumbled. At first, Brian Mitchell still believed he'd made the right decision. He told himself he was protecting his family, that it wasn't personal, it was practical. Bills were piling up, groceries cost more every week, and Kelly had been pressuring him to draw the line. He convinced himself that asking his mother to leave was necessary, but the truth caught up to him faster than he expected. The house, her house that he once bragged about owning, slipped into foreclosure. Turns out comfort has a price, and Brian had been paying with credit cards and pride. The side hustles didn't last. The warehouse job drained him. And Kelly? She eventually packed up their 2 boys and left, saying she couldn't build a future with someone stuck in the past. Now he was sleeping on a borrowed cot in a friend's damp basement. The silence at night was thick. No footsteps upstairs, no laughter, not even the sound of a television. Just regret and the quiet hum of everything he had let fall apart. One cold afternoon, while walking past the public library, Brian ducked inside to warm up. A small flyer caught his eye. It was printed on cream cardstock, elegant, simple. The heading read, "Linda's Table, Community Meals, Shelter, Support." His eyes froze. Linda? He blinked once, then twice. He hadn't heard her name in years. He assumed she'd ended up in a nursing home, or worse. But something about the flyer tugged at him, harder than shame, heavier than pride. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was guilt. The next morning, he walked across town. He didn't know what to expect. But when he reached the small building, he stopped in his tracks. It was beautiful, not in a flashy way, but in a way that made you feel welcome. Fresh paint, sunflowers lining the walkway, a hand-carved wooden sign above the door. He stepped inside. The scent of warm bread hit him first, then the sound of children laughing somewhere in the back. Volunteers moved through the space with calm and purpose, and behind the reception desk sat a woman in a beige cardigan typing on a small laptop. His breath caught in his throat. She looked up. Their eyes met. "Mom," he whispered. Linda's hands paused, but her expression didn't crack. She rose, slowly walking around the desk. Brian lowered his head. The words poured out. "I lost the house. Kelly's gone. I don't have anywhere else to go." She didn't rush. She didn't scold. She simply looked at him with the same eyes that once watched over him as a child. After a long silence, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come inside," she said softly. "You look cold." And just like that, the door opened again, not with anger, but with grace. Brian didn't think he deserved to be let in, but Linda did it anyway. She poured him a mug of hot tea, led him to a small table near the window, and let the silence sit between them like an old friend. He couldn't stop looking around. The place was vibrant. Children coloring in the corner, volunteers laughing softly in the kitchen, shelves lined with warm blankets and neatly stacked canned goods. It was a place built from love, not charity. "This place, it's yours?" he finally asked. Linda nodded, her smile gentle. "I thought you had nothing," he said, the words barely audible. "I had peace," she replied. "And enough." Brian swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the mug. "Why didn't you tell me you had money, or land, or any of this?" Linda met his eyes without blinking. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer. He couldn't. She continued. "I needed to know who'd stay close when I had nothing to give, because that's who I wanted to build for." "I was awful to you," Brian admitted. "You trusted me, and I turned you away." Linda reached across the table, her hand covering his. Her skin was softer now, but her grip still held the quiet strength of a woman who had carried generations on her back. "You forgot yourself," she said. "That doesn't mean you can't find your way back," Brian cried then. Quiet, broken sobs that he had held in for too long. And Linda let him, without judgment, without rush. That spring, Brian began showing up every morning at Linda's table. He helped prep vegetables, hauled boxes, and swept floors. He didn't ask for a paycheck. He didn't expect praise. He Just worked, honestly, steadily, like he was learning how to be human again. Linda watched him quietly, never needing to say much. Every Friday, they sat together on the porch after dinner service, watching the sunset and listening to the laughter of children echoing across the yard. Then one evening, Linda handed Brian a plain envelope. Inside was the original deed to the house he'd lost, and a voided check from the land sale, framed. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "But now you know what happens when love comes before pride." Brian looked at her, not just as a mother, but as the woman she had always been. Not weak, not dependent, but wise, steady, and quietly powerful. Years later, when Linda passed peacefully in her sleep, hundreds gathered to honor her. There were no gold-lined caskets, no news headlines, just stories from shelter volunteers, school teachers, single moms, and former runaways. Stories of the woman who fed them, listened to them, forgave them. And Brian? He stood before them, holding her favorite apron in his hands. "My mother left her house once with a suitcase and a quiet heart," he said, voice steady. "And in that silence, she built something stronger than any of us ever knew." Behind him, carved into the wood above the entrance, were her words. "The doors that close behind you can't match the ones you open for others." And Brian Mitchell, once lost in bitterness, had finally become the man she always believed he could be. All because one woman chose grace over revenge. This story wasn't just about a mother and her son. It was about dignity, second chances, and the quiet strength of choosing love when bitterness would have been easier. Linda's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in compassion, resilience, and the ability to forgive even when it hurts. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your life, a parent, a grandparent, or maybe even yourself, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone showed you grace when you didn't deserve it? Or maybe you were the one who offered kindness when others turned away. Your stories matter, just like Linda's. And if you believe the world needs more places like Linda's table, places built on love rather than judgment, let us know below. We read every comment, and your voice helps keep this community alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Another powerful tale of transformation, redemption, and hope. Because sometimes the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary stories.